Is North Korea going to be the biggest test and the most important test of the bilateral relations?
I think it's going to be the most immediate test. I think that what Kim Jong-un is doing is really ratcheting up his testing to see how far he can go. And I think President Trump is going to take a very different view. He's already said through Secretary of State Tillerson that our strategic patience is at an end. And therefore, there are only three things that really can take place, and that would be for the regime of Kim Jong to change the direction they're heading, or for there to be regime change. And that would mean either interior from the inside or from the outside.
You serve for the Clinton administration. There has been complaints since Clinton administration about the very start about how to deal with the DPRK issue was not necessarily the most productive. How would you respond?
Well, we did in fact have an agreement that was enforced. The North Koreans did in fact cheat on that agreement by developing an alternative plutonium-based program. But during that time, we had a restraint on their development of their nuclear weapons. And I think that the program we had in place, as it was effective. They unfortunately, they cheated on a way to get around it.
Now China proposed double suspension. Secretary Tillerson, during his trip in Northeast Asia, he said different things at different countries. So what do you think is the way out?
North Korea cannot exist without China. If China were to withdraw its economic support for the North Koreans, it would collapse. I understand they don't want to see that take place, but a stronger signal coming from the Chinese to the North Koreans saying you either change this or you will face a regime change from within. I think that's the most effective. Barring that, I think the United States will say we're not going to continue to tolerate what this man is doing. So I would rather have it come from Chinese putting real economic pressure rather than having a military solution, but there may be a military option that will ultimately be exercised. I don't think that's the best way to handle it, but it may be the only way.
Well, on the other hand, China has been implementing the UN Security Council resolution, including not import oil to a certain extent from the DPRK. But Secretary Cohen, China has been in a very interesting situation. It talks about this crisis or looming crisis ultimately is one between DPRK and the United States, because DPRK is making a ICBM toward the United States. Of course, there's also threat to South Korea, Japan, and the neighbor China as well. But what do you think should be the proactive attitude coming from the United States rather than just urge everybody to do their work?
Well, the United States has been part of the six-party talks for years now. And the North Koreans take the position, so they're extortionists basically. They're saying, give us food, give us economic assistance before we test again. So the extortionist continues. And I think the Trump administration is going to say no more extortion, no more blackmail. If you continue down this path, there's going to be a very substantial reaction. I would like to think that before we were to take any action, we would certainly coordinate with the South Koreans and with the Japanese, tell the Chinese and the Russians what we intend to do, so there's no mistake about it. But I think it's going to be a pretty muscular reaction in the event that there's not a change of direction.
There's always a security issue for everybody, isn't it? Even for the DPRK itself. A claim that they developed the nuclear weapon in the name of protecting themselves to deter the others from attacking it. Ultimately, do you think that issue has to be handled, the security issue itself?
I think that's a fabricated rationale for maintaining the regime in a military dictatorship as such. I would rather see a united Korean peninsula that could be demilitarized as such, but that would not pose a threat to the Chinese. China does not want to see a unified peninsula with the U.S. having its bases near its borders. So that's understandable, but to me, there's a solution of having a peaceful unification, and that's the ultimate goal.
When William Cohen, a Republican, served as defense secretary under Democrat President Bill Clinton, he said the tradition of partisan, or rather bipartisan cooperation was quite respected inside the Beltway. But now the opposition between Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. has become really ugly, according to him. From the attacks on each other during the presidential campaign last year to the quarrels at both houses of Congress, some worry that the bigger fight between the two parties will affect the U.S. relations with the international community. Mr. Cohen gave us an insider view on how U.S. bipartisan politics could influence relations between China and the United States even. Secretary Cohen, talking about China-U.S. relations, we've seen the initial plan, at least reported in the press, about the heads of state meeting one another, the Chinese president and the U.S. president. But in the statement coming out recently, none of the two parties mentioned about the specific date. How should we understand this?
Well, first, you have a very young administration in the United States. It's only been 2 months. This is not an administration that has much governmental experience. The president himself has only been in business. So I think they're learning, and they have a very steep learning curve that they have to climb in order to get ready. I would say on the one hand, it's probably premature to have a state visit or a summit in the sense that we have a number of things that we want to put on the table, a number of things we want to take back from the table. That takes time. That takes staff, mutual staff, sitting down, going through the issues, communicating. So I'd say it's premature at this point, and yet on the other hand, every day that goes by when they don't meet is not a good day. So my own expectation would be that a meeting will take place sooner rather than later. I think it will be more symbolic than actual substance, because it's going to take time to develop the substance. I think the fact that you have the two leaders of the two biggest economies in the world shaking hands, sitting down, getting to know each other, that in itself is a substantive outcome. But getting down to the details of how we negotiate a new trade arrangement, what kind of things that we have to take into account, where are the battle lines that have to be fought over, that's going to take time.
You are well known for being bipartisan.
Right.
And now some are suggesting Washington's politics is even more frozen than when the Obama administration began its term. Is that what
we had in the Obama administration, we had a good deal of partisanship. Republicans certainly set out to make sure that if they could, that Obama could not get reelected. Well, that was unsuccessful. He had 2 terms. Now you have control in the House and the Senate. Nonetheless, you do have people in the Senate who aren't necessarily in agreement with the president's stated policies. So I think there'll be less partisanship in the sense Republicans will be in charge, but not as in charge in the Senate, because the Senate has different rules. In the House, the Speaker controls the gavel. They can push things through a simple majority vote. Cannot do that in the Senate. So this is something else the Trump administration is learning. It's a co-equal branch of government.
That's right.
And they have a voice. They have control of the purse strings. And so there's going to be a lot of negotiation and give and take between the executive branch and the Congress.
What would you think that would mean, possibly, for U.S.-China relations as a result?
Well, I think the president sets the tone and the terms of engagement. I think during the course of the campaign it was very negative. And I did not agree with that. I spoke out against that. Now that he has people who are advising him who have extensive global experience in the financial world and the political world, that you will see his views come closer to being more conservative than libertarian or a hybrid. I think he's coming back to basic sound principles, and even though he's still going to tweet, I'm not part of the Twitter world, so it's something I've avoided at all costs, but I think there are words that are used without contemplation of consequences, and I think he is seeing when he says something what it can produce. Some of that may be deliberate. Some of it may be to keep sending people on these wild goose chases while he's conducting other business. That cannot be sustained over a long period.
Yes, indeed. Before we go, one final question for you. Earlier, I had an exclusive with the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Mr. Cui Tenkai. I'm sure you have worked with him before.
I know him well and enjoy him.
Yes, indeed. And he was joking with me about what is the nature of U.S.-China relations right now at the very beginning of this administration. He said, don't try to give the name to a baby before a baby is even born. Of course, that's a joke. Putting jokes aside, what do you think is the nature of this relationship? Is it time to give it a name?
It's too early to give it a name. President Trump does not have and has not formulated a coherent foreign policy at this point. He has approached it almost as he would on a business basis, that I take one thing at a time. I build one building or these complex of buildings at a time. As President of the United States, you have to take a comprehensive look at the globe, seeing that a statement made here or an action taken there can have consequences that should have been contemplated. So we don't want to have a lot of, quote, black swans. And black swans, was mentioned at the conference yesterday. That is something that is foreseeable but not foreseen. We don't want to see a lot of black swans in this relationship where we have something that seems remote but also has major consequences. So I think we're in the infancy of developing the policy. It will have to come fairly quickly. It's not there yet. Secretary Tillerson was here trying to establish a good relationship with the president and his counterpart. He will go back to President Trump. They will sit down and say, here's how I think we need to approach China. The president will have to talk to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Defense Mattis, and say, what about our military capabilities? What are our military options in the event we have to deal with North Korea? All of that has to be put together, and that has yet to be put together in my judgment. I may be mistaken on this, but I think it's premature.
Secretary Cohen, what a pleasure to have you. Always so wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much.